Hi there. I just wanted to take you through a quick start for getting started with Carbon Black Cloud and its API using Postman. So this is a quick start, and the objective is, as I said, getting started on Carbon Black Cloud as well as scripting. APIs and Postman can get confusing, and you can get stuck on syntax errors. This is a quick start example that you can use to start creating scripts for Carbon Black Cloud. You can then use ChatGPT and start building much more sophisticated scripts. So please make sure you review the Carbon Black API documentation, as well as please take note of the Carbon Black Postman API collection. And then in terms of the agenda, we're going to go through setting up the API and permissions on Carbon Black Cloud. We'll go through a CURL example where you can just run a test, and it's the simplest methods to make sure your API keys are working. And then we'll go through setting up Postman global variables, and then setting up Postman authentication, and then also some of the examples, API examples, are actually posts where you actually need to submit a JSON. So we'll go through how to set up Postman to submit a JSON body, and then we'll actually use Postman to create that API call into Python or PowerShell or any other language that is supported or by the using Postman as well. So firstly, the API setup. As a first step before creating the API keys via Carbon Black Cloud Console, you definitely need to review the documentation and the developer network and identify the access level and permissions required for the API call. As an example, to download Carbon Black sensor via API, you scroll down to Get Sensor Kit and configuration links and review the API permissions required. Follow the directions and create the API corresponding API keys based on custom permissions. And on the right-hand side, you can see the example of the permissions that's required. So if you want to troubleshoot, you can create a Superman admin, but don't leave that running. Just use that for testing only. But it's a good idea just to do that if you get stuck with permissions and syntax errors, just to make it your life easier to progress writing these scripts. So this script, the access level that's required is org.kit with execute. So in order to create the actual API access inside Carbon Black Cloud, open Carbon Black Cloud, create the API access. You either create an API key or access level. So we can do both. Then create the corresponding access level as per the developer documentations that we looked at previously. And then create the API keys and select access level or create the level that you just created. So we'll go through a demonstration of that. So firstly, what we're going to do is have a look at developer.carbonblack.com. So we're going to go through workload. That's where we're going to get the API details for the sensor download specifically. So sensor lifecycle management is what we're looking at. Just going to quickly scroll down. There's a lot of information here, but I just wanted to find the API call that I want to do, and then identify the permissions firstly. So get sensor kit configuration is the call that I want, the permissions, and that's the permissions there. Now we can go back to Carbon Black Cloud, go API access. You can either create the API key here or create the access level here. So I'm just going to delete what I did before. Add access level, then put a name. It's going to name it API, whatever you want. And then put a description. I'm just going to copy and paste this here. And then I'm going to try and find the actual the API access level. So scrolling and to find it. I'll find it soon. There it is. So device, download sensor kits, and update sensor. So we give the execute permission as per the documentation. Now we can save, and we can actually then create the API key at a custom level, name the API key, custom. You can also do API if you want to, but we'll just do custom. Then we create the access level that we just created. You can also add authorized IPs, but just for testing, leave that. Take note of these API keys, and we're good to go for the next step. So now that you have the API keys, take note of the API keys as you will create them as global variable. This is a really important step, as well as you really need to make sure that you have the syntax correct, otherwise you get confused. So Carbon Black Cloud API ID is the same as that variable there, cb underscore custom dot underscore key. And the double brackets means that there are actual variable inside Postman. So again, the API secret key is cb underscore custom underscore ID. Then the cb URL. Make sure you use the right URL for your tenancy, and you can find the US URLs in the documentation as well. And the OR key is the same as your Carbon Black Cloud OR key, not your org ID. Now, what I would suggest you is you put that in a document, a text file, and write out these variables. So the first one is a CB URL, CB OR key, then the custom ID, the custom key, CB custom key, and then you need to create a variable called x dash with an AUTH dash token, and that is made up of API secret key / API ID as per that example, and that's going to be a variable as well. That is really important to note. So we're using XAuth tokens, and this is the way you set up this inside Postman. So let's have a look at just taking note of the variables. So take note of these API keys. Obviously, these are my keys. They will not exist after this presentation. And make sure you create your variables or your text file with the right combinations of keys as well. So URL or key, make sure that's correct, and the actual variables as well. Okay, let's move on. So next thing you need to do is open the Postman collection inside Postman. So Postman is a fantastic and free product which you can use the desktop, web, or now there's even a plugin for Visual Code. So I suggest you start using the Visual Code plugin, which is as well. In this example, I'm just going to use a desktop plugin, but either of those will work. And you can find the Carbon Black Postman collection with all of the integrated documentation at this link. One of the great things about Carbon Black is that we provide this to you, and it's very, very clearly documented. Create a clone of this collection, and that's an example where you can test number 4, test the Postman itself, just for your reference. So first thing I like to do is create the global variables as per the API keys that you noted in that text file. So I set the IDs and keys as secret. So as you can see in my example, I've actually for security, even though you see my keys already, I've created that as secret. So you create the CB URL, CB org, CB custom ID, CB key as global variables. And then